Okay, good morning, folks. It's 9:30, so let's get started. We've got a fair few things on the agenda. It may not be the longest, but there are a few potentially meaty items, so let's start on time. Welcome, first of all, to David McNiven, who's here for his first official meeting as Service User Rep. I have apologies noted from Sarah Lacey. Are there any other apologies? No. Can we move then to declarations of interest? Does anyone have anything they wish to declare in relation to any of the items on today's agenda? Not seeing anything. Great. Can we move then to the minute of our last meeting from June? Go through it first for accuracy. Anything on page 5 of the papers? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Okay, can we approve that as an accurate record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Is there anything on the action log that we need to look at? I think everything's pretty much in hand here.
Yeah, the two open actions on the action log will come back to IJB in March as part of the budget process for the first item, and the second item is expected to come in December to IJB.
Okay, thank you. Anything else anyone wants to raise in relation to the last one? Thank you. Okay, if we can move on then. Slight change to the agenda, which was notified to members, I think, yesterday afternoon. So we're going to take item 5, the deputation, and then after that we'll take item 14, which is the motion in the name of Councillor Hannah, as it relates to the same subject. It makes sense to do the two of them together in my view. So item 5 then is the deputation, which has been submitted under Standing Order 16. It was submitted in due time and in the correct format. Technically, the IJB needs to decide whether or not to hear the deputation. I'm assuming members are happy to do so.
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay, take that as agreed. If you could bring them in, Jim, thank you. Okay, good morning. Thank you for coming along this morning. As you know, you have 10 minutes to present your case as a deputation. Up to you how you want to divide that time between the three of you. You just press the button in front of you, that'll turn on the microphone so everyone online can hear everything you're saying. So over to you, Mr. Bichet.
So my name's Victoria. My mum's a resident at Tuggershaw Court and has been since February 2024. The main reason my mum moved to Tuggershaw was because the home care package wasn't suitable any longer at her own home. But a care home wasn't suitable either. Tuggershaw is a bridge before a care home. Sorry. My mum is 68 years old and has a brain injury. It took a lot for my mum to build trust with the staff at Tuggershaw. They're now like family to my mum, myself and my kids. We're all in first name terms. They know our stories, we know theirs. With my mum's condition, she needs consistency. In every aspect of her life, she needs it. With home care, she won't get that. When my mum was at home, she didn't socialise with anyone outside of myself and the home care staff. Now at Tuggershaw, she has the carers who transport her in her wheelchair down to the lounge. to social events 2 or 3 times a week, where she will happily sit for hours with other residents, one being my mum's cousin, who she hadn't seen for over 5 years due to ill health. Now they have a loving relationship again. Taking the care away means they won't have these events where they can go and be part of the community that Tuggershaw has built for 40 years. My mum is now scared she'll be alone again. The security of the building is a major worry, as right now the staff are on site, and if they don't know a visitor, they will stop and question them. Take the carers away and these residents are at risk of strangers walking into their flats. The buzzer system is not a security measure. My mum can't work her buzzer, so she wouldn't be able to let anyone into the building like doctors, pharmacists or emergency services. This point was made that residents could in fact work the buzzer system. That's false. So if I'm not there to let them in, there will be no one. Part of the care package my mum signed stated that she would get her washing done for her, as she is in an upstairs flat and in a wheelchair. She cannot do this service herself. My mum's flat does not have space for washing facilities, as there is a purpose-built laundry room. If my mum was to have a fall and used her Mex, the staff right now would get to her within minutes, if not less. But if she has to wait on Mex arriving to the complex, this time could be 30 minutes or longer. My mum has osteoporosis, and if left untreated, this could be life-threatening. We trust these carers with their parents' lives. And we feel helpless seeing our parents worried, stressed and depressed, thinking they are going to lose them. I will quote one resident: "If we lose these girls, I will take all my pills." I've lived with that statement all summer, watching a woman scared she's going to lose her only connection to the outside world. This isn't about money. This is about people's lives.
Good morning to the panel members and everyone in the room. I am a solicitor. I work in the Falkirk area. I live in the Dunny Pace area, so I do have an interest to this case, both personally and professionally. I predominantly represent Mrs. O'Shea, who is the wife of Mr. O'Shea, but collectively I hear the opinions and the views of all residents, next of kin's power of attorneys. I was really brought in by Mrs. O'Shea to look at this in terms of the legalities of what Falkirk Council have done, and we're really starting the beginning at the end, and that's really how this process has went. We are at the end before any of the residents knew of the beginning, and that is really my key point today that the panel should be aware of, and I would be looking for them to change that decision that's been made earlier, because the residents of Tuggershaw have never received any paperwork in terms of the consultation. The panel will be well aware of the need for an adequate consultation process to have taken place. There needs to be an opportunity for comment, for people's views, for perhaps other options to be put forward. There needs to be an open procedure that's taken place. It has to be transparent, it has to be fair. Notwithstanding any of that, it has to be made available, and it wasn't made available to these residents. The residents of Tuggershaw consist of around 22 residents. We have recently lost residents during this fight, but the age of the residents vary from 61 until to 99. And I'm sure anybody around this table with a heart, that I'm sure you all have, would understand that someone at 99, really their life should not change at this late stage. And that goes for everyone in Tuggershaw, because it is a very bespoke complex. There are very specific care needs. It probably would not be a like-for-like service, as the council have suggested. And if it is, then you have to question why they're doing it. It is a very small saving of 125,000. There has been nothing else put to anyone in any suggestions in terms of other options. Could that money be raised some other way? Could there be some other service reduced or something else done? There's no options being put forward than railroading this one decision. But before we even get to the part about all the reasons this should not happen, that opportunity has not been given to any of the residents. You will be aware, no doubt, that it was an online consultation. I'm not sure if anybody in here has a grandparent that can use online systems. Some people that are at that certain age and stage, they have certain disabilities, they are not going to be able to access an online consultation. My understanding is there was no postal consultation made, there was no face-to-face consultation made. In terms of equality legislation, the vulnerability legislation, in terms of adults with incapacity, I could go on. There are many provisions that should have been looked at in terms of giving these residents perhaps a one-to-one consultation, at least speaking with their next of kin or those who have power of attorney over them. Some of these residents already have power of attorney over them, and my understanding is that none of the attorneys were contacted during this process. So there seems, in my view, and I'm dealing with an isolated incident of the legalities, that there are many flaws in this case. There are many procedures and processes that haven't been followed. Now, the consultation started in January and closed in July, and only once it was closed did the residents then receive postal notification that this process had taken place. So that in itself would ring alarm bells to me. Why was that process not done by postal in the first instance? Why, when the votes came in, did nobody look and say, nobody from Tuggershaw has even commented on this, far less objected to it? I think that in itself should have raised some alarm bells in terms of whether those residents even received any notification about that. So the consultation is the main part today, and we would be looking for, I have already written to Falkirk Council. There have been many protests. Obviously, the panel is well aware of the public outcry, the media attention, the tenants upset, the next of kin's effect of that. The local community is up in arms. This is a very bespoke service. It's been there for over 40 years. Everybody went into that complex understanding that that was them until the end of life. And they signed an additional contract in addition to their tenancy agreement, which gave them a specific bespoke care package. There's been no communication from Falkirk Council about any variation or termination of that additional care package. I don't see anything within the contract that even allows them to do that. It's been raised by one of the members already, and they were laughed upon at a meeting, which was very disrespectful and shows the level of care, for want of a better word, that the council seem to be applying here. They seem to have put out a consultation, feel they've ticked the box of that being fair and transparent. Nobody has replied. That's what they wanted. Fingers crossed nobody did. And then they've now advised all the residents that this is what's going to happen. I appreciate that that has been temporarily halted. And again, the residents aren't really told why that's been halted, but we are pleased that it is. So today we would like the board to allow a reconsultation, start this process again. Let's just draw a line under what's happened and start again. Allow the resident, their next of kin, their attorneys, to have their view. Everybody understands business needs. Everybody understands we are in a cost of living crisis. There is economic difficulties presenting us. But people need a fair voice. They need to be able to be heard. They have to put forward their views. And then if there is two sides and then a decision is made by the board after that, then that is fair enough. That is fair, that's transparent. Everybody's had their voice. At the moment, it is very one-sided with an imbalance in power from the council against the residents, and that in itself, to me, is a very unfair position to be in, and it's certainly not been an adequate consultation process in my view. Beyond that, there are many other points, but my point today is that consultation should be allowed to happen again from fresh, and then we could come into the other matters in terms of the contract, the effect on the residents, etc., the door entry system, etc. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There is a period now where members of the IJB can ask questions of the delegation. Does anyone want to come in? No, I'm not seeing any hands around the table. Okay, thank you for your remarks. We'll move on with the agenda. Thank you. Okay, so we now move on to the motion in the name of Councillor Hannah. Can I ask you to move the motion, Councillor?
Thank you, Convener. I was informed before I came here today that actually our standing orders don't limit my time, but I can promise you I am not going to abuse that privilege, and I maybe suggest that we should consider a change to standing orders at some point. When you've got a board of this sort with politicians on it, you do sometimes have to tell us when to stop. However, I will be fairly brief because I think that the terms of the motion, which is before the board today, are fairly clear. The motion which I have put forward is asking a number of questions. I think from the deputation we've heard some of the concerns that have been raised, and I have to say that over the summer, probably like other board members, I have had a number of issues raised with me over the last couple of months since Tiggins Hall was selected by the options appraisal as the housing with care complex which would be selected. And the questions I have been asked have made it perfectly obvious to me that there's a huge amount of misinformation out there. There's a lot of questions I've been asked where I've said I've had to go back and dig into it to find the answers. I know more about Tiggins Hoch than probably any other decision that I have been party to since I became a councillor now, because I've had to check up on everything that has been said. So my concern here is not about halting or pausing or reversing the decision of the Integration Joint Board. I am not convinced that that is justified, but I am convinced that the way in which that decision has been implemented has been less than ideal, and that we need to look at the way in which it's been implemented and get some of the information out publicly. Because I have read things in the papers, I have had letters from people, I've had emails from people which have said things like, don't close this care home. Now, when I made the decision along with the rest of the board in March, I thought we were making a decision about housing with care. Now, housing with care is not a care home, it is a tenancy. The residents have a tenancy. So Tiggins Hall is not a care home, it's not closing. And I have been assured that care is not being taken away from anyone who is eligible, who fulfills, that's a hard word to say, anyone who fulfills the eligibility criteria for a care package will still have that care provided. But it is absolutely crystal clear that the way in which the information has been passed over to residents, to families, and to staff has not been as clear, and there has not been the adequate opportunity. So my motion is asking for full and transparent information to be brought to the IJB so that it's in the public domain and everyone is quite clear about the reasons for the decision having been made and the process which was undergone to make that decision.
Okay, thank you. Before we move to discussion, I have to ask if there is a seconder for the motion.
Yes, I'm happy to second the motion and just say a couple of words. I do have a few questions as well. I think it's, I would support everything that Anne has just said. I would want to thank all of the residents and families who have been in touch, and also thank officers and every single email I have read, every comment that has been sent to me. I've been asking officers around those questions and to make that information available. And I know that a lot of work has been done to make sure as much information is available as possible. So I do want to recognise. I think it is also important to recognise that this decision is really challenging for individuals. It's really challenging for families and really challenging for staff. And as board members, it's something that's really difficult because we have to set it in the context of the whole budget. And the next report that's coming to us after the chief officer report is around the financial position of the board and the projected overspend in social care, along with the budget gap of over £11 million, and the fact that there's actually a significant shortfall in the savings identified for this year. So we still have work to do in terms of balancing the budget. I'm also acutely aware as a councillor that the partners, which is NHS Forth Valley and Falkirk Council, will be responsible for supporting the budget, and so that will add to the council's budget gap and the challenges that the NHS has with their own budget. To me, this isn't about money, and when we think about that, although I've just mentioned money, but if we are unable to make decisions and unable to follow them through, people in our community right now will have to wait for care packages, or might even be unable to get them at all. And I think that's the context we need to sit it in. This is, and I'm also a local member for the area, so it's been particularly difficult because, you know, I really hear the distress that individuals have over it, but we have to think of the full context of everybody in the district, and that this decision is about re-provisioning care. And as Anne said, it's not about closing a care home. People who need care will still have it. I think, though, it is important, and as part of Anne's motion, around assurance and ensuring that that those who have a care package and have particular concerns, and I hear very much around the issues around being unable to use buzzers, about MECs, about laundry, you know, the practicalities of individuals' lives, and ensuring that we have assurance that the support and the outcomes that are expected from the re-provisioning are there, and that we get that assurance back as board members, so that we know that the decisions we make and we follow them through, that we have assurance of the support that individuals have. I don't want to say any more. I think it is important not to have to be very clear that, and so that there's no confusion here, but that this is not about revisiting the decision, but it's about ensuring that we learn for the future and we have assurance about the decision that has been made.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. So the motion has been moved and seconded. Can open it up now for discussion. Gail?
I just wanted to make some comments. So as Chief Officer, I want to acknowledge the concern that's been raised about the IJV's decision in March to change the way that care is provided at Tickethaw Housing with Care. I know this has caused anxiety for residents, families and staff, and generated considerable discussion. While I want to remind everyone of the reasons behind this decision, I should also outline what this is not. This is not a proposal to reduce the level of care that people receive. This is about delivering the care that people need within the resources that we have available. The IJB is facing a significant financial challenge. Over the next 3 years is a gap of £21 million between the funding we have and the cost of delivering health and social care services to people in Falkirk. We are not legally allowed to overspend our budget, and if we're unable to contain our spend within the budget we've been allocated, our partners, the Council and the NHS, would have to provide additional funding. With both of these partner organisations already facing significant budget challenges, deep cuts to other services would have to be made to provide additional IJB requirements. At Tiggotts Haugh, currently less than half of the available staff capacity is required to meet the residents' assessed care needs. At the same time, there are people elsewhere in Falkirk waiting for their care needs to be met. This means that our resources are not lined up with where people's needs are, and we're not making the best use of public money. It's also important to be clear that not every resident at Tiggotts Haugh requires care, and for those that who do, they can already choose how their care is provided, as is their right under the Social Care Self-Directed Support Act. Care also cannot legally be directly tied to a tenancy. Together, these factors mean that the current model at Tiggotts Haugh is not an efficient model. I know that change is difficult for everyone involved, and how important Tiggotts Haugh is for residents, families, staff, and the local community. We want Tiggotts Haugh to remain home to its residents for as long as they need it, and with the support they need to maximise their independence and quality of life. That's why we're working closely with residents and families through regular communication and meetings to discuss individual circumstances, and will continue to provide support throughout and after this change. We're supporting our staff through the Council's HR procedures with a preference to offer alternative roles for colleagues choosing redeployment. The IJB are making and will continue to be asked to make difficult decisions, but they are necessary if we were to make sure that as many people in Falkirk can get the care they need within the resources we have available. We will continue to take an open and collaborative approach with residents, families, staff and partners, listening to concerns and supporting people through change. Our shared aim is to protect what matters most, that's safe, compassionate care that helps people live well now and into the future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Are there other members want to come in? Roger.
Thanks, Chair. I have to take issue with some of the misinformation that's just been shared of the IJB just now. The care that is provided by the dedicated staff at Tiggotts Haugh is not equivalent to the proposed care of maybe 4 visits a day, for instance. It's a dedicated group of staff who know each other, work collectively together as a team, who will share how residents are and support residents in a collective way, which any social worker will know is not the same as different outsourced services coming in to different people in Tiggotts Haugh for 4 hours, 4 visits a day, for instance. It is completely different. You cannot compare apples with oranges. These are different types of care. The whole purpose of housing with care is that, as we heard from the woman earlier on, is that prevention of the need for residents to move into bedded care, which is, as we know, is far more expensive. And as we know, Falkirk has a very high rate of people in bedded care. So instead of cutting back on these services, we should be seeing it as part of the broad spectrum of care. Now, one of the things which has occurred to me over the last few months of looking into this is the comments about a lot of people in the housing with care complexes in Falkirk are not needing care. And it's clear that the Health and Social Care Partnership here in Falkirk is not working in partnership with the housing services in Falkirk. Otherwise, you'd make sure that people who move to Tiggotts Haugh and other housing with care were needing that level of care that Tiggotts Haugh is designed to provide. Instead, we have an inefficient service because we're not working in partnership ensure that the people who need Diggers Hall, and there's a lot of them out there, get Diggers Hall. This is a specialist service for people who have that level of need. It is not the same. And please, please, please don't go around pretending it's the same service as our home care service. They will not get the same level of service. It will be a different service. Don't compare apples to oranges. That is completely different. So please, also, I've been blamed for, as a union representative, being put on my shoulders for not arguing more strongly during the consultation to prevent this. But I try and work collaboratively with the IJB. I don't think it's my job to stand on a soapbox and shout and bawl. That would not be listened to. But it's been quite clear from the beginning that I wasn't going to be listened to in relation to this closure of this service. And I will use the word closure because although the service has been repositioned, it is a closure of a service to these residents, and it's not the same. I will add this and emphasise this is not the same as housing home care. It is a very different service, and it does prevent, any social worker would tell you, it prevents people ending up in residential care or in hospital, and that is surely what the raison d'etre of the IJB is. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. And can I just assure you, while I'm chairing this IJB, all members will be heard and will have the right to speak whether they are voting or not. Any other members want to come in on this debate? Councillor Hannah?
It's not to make any points. I've already proposed my motion, but I think it would be useful if we could have a bit of clarity and transparency. The deputation referred to the difference between housing with care and home care and care at home, and as has Roger here just now. Could officers please clarify what is housing with care and how does it differ from home care?
Carolyn, sorry to put you on the spot, but could I ask you to answer that one for us?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'm not sure if Kenny would want to come in as well. So I think the first thing to note is the terminology with housing with care and care at home is developed. Housing with care services are registered with the Care Inspectorate as care at home housing support services. Housing with care is actually not a separate category of registered service and has no legal status. Such services have developed to sustain people within their own home, and the model of housing with care supports people who are normally over 60 and have care and or support needs. Some of it's to do with the physical environment that's offered within housing with care, not so much about actually a care package formally being delivered. What that means is a person who moves into housing with care may not have eligible care needs in line with their eligibility criteria to have formal care provided from the partnership. People living in housing with care accommodation have a housing tenancy, and if they're eligible in terms of an assessment of needs, they can choose who provides this care, including from local care providers. The HSCP housing with care staff, or they can employ a personal assistant. I think as Gail referenced, we're talking there around self-directed support and the choices that people have in terms of how their care is provided. Currently, we have some clients that have chosen not to have their care delivered from housing with care service, and that is their own personal choice. The tenancy legally must be separate from the care provided, otherwise the service would need to register as a care home, which isn't the case for any of the housing with care complexes. They operate differently. I don't know, Kenny, if there's anything you would want to add around housing with care.
Thank you, Caroline, Chair, if it's okay. No, Caroline, you've eloquently put that well. It's maybe worth me just coming in regards to the tenancy itself, Chair, that the people within this complex will have a standard Scottish Secure Tenancy Agreement, and that's our obligations, and that's under the Housing 2001 Act. housing, the tenancy agreement, it will not be changed in any way, which means that we as a housing service have certain requirements when we have to do anything or change. But because there is no change to that tenancy agreement, that is why we would just keep it as is. So there'd be no change from a housing perspective and provides comfort to the individual residents in regards to the housing aspect. Chair.
Okay, thank you both for that information. Does anyone else want to come in before we come to this? Councillor Hannah.
Sorry, I do have a few questions, but I'll just ask one just now and allow others to come in. You mentioned, Gail, that less than half of the staff resource in Tiggetts Hawk is actually required for the care being provided. Can you say a little more about that, how that has come about, and how does that kind of, I suppose, service user to staff ratio compare with other housing with care complexes or with care homes?
Through yourself, Chair, again, I'd invite Caroline in to provide a little bit more detail to the answer to your question.
So I think there's two parts of the question, if I'm picking it up right. The first one is around how we've ended up in a position where a number of people that live in housing with care complexes don't require formal care services. Some of that's to do with perhaps people have moved into housing with care complexes along with someone else, and when they've passed away under the tenancy rules, they obviously can apply to become the tenant. Some of it's around we perhaps at points in time haven't had the demand for housing with care properties. The partnership don't pay for voids, and obviously housing have to have an income in terms of the rent. What happens is they then look at, in line with the criteria for housing with care complexes, who else would be appropriate to move into them. So it goes back to that bit about you may meet the criteria to be able to move into a housing with care complex, but you wouldn't meet the criteria to get an assessed care package from the partnership. So they're two different things or two different levels of eligibility. And I think, some of that's been the confusion around housing with care. There's a presumption that, you're moving into a housing with care property, there'll be a care element to that. And that's not the case. They're two different things. In terms of, the level of care that's delivered, that is based on assessed needs in line with the eligibility criteria. There is, I think as was referenced previously, there's access to laundry facilities, and, the tenants have different levels of social events. We had already, as an improvement action through a different process, looked at supporting tenants to set up their own committee around the social fund, and they would be responsible for organising it. The provision of social activities, it was never part of the housing with care registration, and it was just really through capacity that had been provided, but it's actually not an assessed need. In terms of the updating of the assessments that's currently happening for clients, part of that will look at, the requirements around support for laundry, the requirements for support for, if there is social care needs that are in line with our criteria, we would look at providing that through the formal care package. I don't know if that kind of covers it, Councillor Hannah, if there's any other points you would want me to go over.
I think that covers what I was asking about. Thank you.
Okay,
thank you, Convener.
Councillor Colley, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thanks. I've got a few questions as well, but I'll do one for the moment. I think it would be helpful the assertion that the consultation was only online, and I think it might be helpful to have a reminder of the consultation and engagement up to the budget, and then post the decision. So I think it'd just be really helpful to have that raised.
Okay, Marie, can I bring you in on that one?
So as we went through the budget process, there were a number of things that happened. So we convened a budget working group to look at the pressures for the budget and bring forward as a budget working group a number of proposals to meet the funding gap. So we had a funding gap of £21 million for this financial year, and over the next 3 years there was pressures of 40 million to be met, and the funding didn't meet that. So we had to bring forward a number of proposals to meet that funding gap. Part of that process was having development sessions with all IJB members. So we had a number of development sessions with IJB members, proposals brought forward, and then we arranged to do a public consultation starting in January, which lasted 6 weeks. So there were a number of areas we put the consultation was out online. We carried out consultation in libraries. We went to carers groups. We went to a number of community groups as well. We shared that widely with staff before the consultation was arranged. There were emails went to particular areas where we understood that particular staff would be involved in these proposals, so they were all notified as well, and they were asked to share widely. As we held staff sessions as well online for all staff who may wanted to come along, which went to all HSCP members of staff. So that public consultation took place for 6 weeks, and I'm just going to look at the numbers here of people that attended. So there were 464 people attended a number of, so that was between the online survey, staff budget briefings, Carers Voices group, the libraries, care and support at home provider forums, there were Scottish Seniors Computer Club, so there were a number of engagement sessions held as well. So it wasn't just online. Senior management tried to go out to as many places as possible around that general consultation throughout the budget consultation. Thanks.
Okay, just before you come back, Councillor Colley, can I remind those in the public gallery that you can observe but you cannot speak? I don't want to have to clear the gallery, but I will do if there continues to be that noise in the background. It does make it very difficult for those online to hear the speakers if there is other noise in the room. Councillor Colley.
Yes, this might have been covered a little bit by Caroline, but I just wanted to ask about how we're ensuring that clients get the right level of care under the new re-provision care, the new whichever provider they choose. I think it's just a question of assurance.
Okay, Caroline, could you come in on the care assessment process, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the care assessments, we have a worker from the social work team who's currently in working with people in terms of updating their assessments, taking in consideration to the proposed changes, so that we can ensure that we've got the right level of care being delivered for individuals. That also includes ensuring that their medication assessment is up to date, because I know that there's been a lot of questions around medication. That, the medication assessment doesn't just look at, administration of medication, it looks at the delivery of medication, making sure that people have the appropriate prescriptions in place, and that the timing of that is all in place. So we actually have pharmacy technicians that are supporting that process. In terms of the allocated worker from the social work team, they've already, started discussions with a number of clients, and they've not raised any. The people that they've spoke to so far, once they've been reassured around this is how the care would be delivered, this is how it would work, they've been reassured around how we've been proposing to take things forward. Following transfer of the care, obviously at any point the worker from the social work team could be contacted if there's any concerns at all from either clients or their family members. But formally at the 2-week mark, we would meet with clients to make sure that things are working out, make any adjustments that are required. And then at the 6-week mark, we would then complete another review of the situation, just to ensure that people's care needs are being met and there's no significant risk around how things are being delivered, and that we can make any adjustments that are required around that.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer the point? Okay, are there any other questions or contributions from members? Roger, can I bring you back?
I've been asked by Councillor Alf Kelly to ask a question. Hopefully that's okay for the Chair. I'll just read it as given to me. If Tiggotts Hall staff are removed, and contrary to the impact assessment suggestion that you do not change housing with care to home care in the 3 other housing with care complexes in Falkirk, would you then revert to the original position and reinstate the staff in Tiggotts Hall? If not, why not?
My understanding of the question is that if in the future the IJB weren't to take a decision around other units, would we go back to still having housing with care at Tiggotts?
That's my understanding of the question.
Okay. So at the moment, the IJB decision per the budget setting meeting in March was to re-provision the care in 1 housing with care unit, and following options appraisal, that was Tiggotts Hall that was identified as that preferred option. There's no current decision by IJB around the other 3 housing with care units. What the IJB did agree would be that we would do a review of bed-based care, and that review will be undertaken, and the outcomes of that review will come back to IJB to take decisions. There is a budgetary saving attached to that, so that will require a decision in terms of delivering that. But at the moment, that review hasn't yet started, so we're not able to say what the outcomes of that review are likely to be. So at the moment, there is no decision by IJB around the other 3 housing with care units. And I suppose at the end of the bed-based review, if there was a decision that we needed more housing with care, for example, that would come through to IJB for a decision at that point in time. So I don't think that's something that we can answer at the moment.
Okay, Councillor Hannah, you.
Thank you. There was reference earlier on to the MEX service, and there was also talk about the difficulty people have with the buzzers to let people in. Could officers please say a little more about what the MEX service can deliver in terms of responding to emergencies, how quickly they can deliver, and what's being done about ensuring that residents are able to use the buzzer system?
Okay, Caroline, could you take those, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the next service actually is a control room that operates 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So in terms of, if MEX receive an alert that goes to the control centre, and then what happens is they get immediate response through the control centre. The type of response is dependent on prioritisation of risk in the MEX care plan. So each person that has a MEX device has a care plan around what response they want if it's activated. So some people choose, actually they would prefer that family are contacted. Some people choose, actually I would prefer that the response comes direct from the MEX service. So the type of response is dependent on that care plan. If the MEX service need to dispatch a mobile warden, they aim to attend emergencies within 30 minutes. The service is staffed using a central control room and a mobile warden response team. And each month they handle over 20,000 calls and have 1,500 visits in the Falkirk area. The other thing to note is they also have different equipment and technology that they can use to help, enhance safety at home. And that's part of the assessment process that's being undertaken at this moment in time. So what adjustments do we need to make around the care plan for MEX, but also is there other technology that would enhance and make people feel safer at home, or do they require other things that we could put in around that? So that, as I say, that's part of the assessment process that's been undertaken at this moment. So the care plans will be updated also in line with the re-provisioning of the service.
Thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I have one more. I suppose this is probably for Marie around the finances, and I suppose it's a question of not taking that saving and being able to take a saving somewhere else, or not taking that saving at all. And I know it's indicate this is a small amount, but it isn't really a small amount when you look at it on a recurring basis. So do you think we'll achieve our full saving for this year? And if it is delayed or not implemented, what are the consequences for the budget and partners? So really about if we didn't take a decision or we changed the decision, what would the implications be?
Thanks. Yeah, so at the moment, so the saving that's set out, I know the figure that was mentioned during the deputation was £125,000, but just to clarify, it's actually £150,000 in total over 2 years. So it was phased over this financial year and next financial year, and that's been clarified when we've responded to a number of complaints. So it's just to confirm that that's the amount that we're talking about. So that was an indicative amount at that point. Because it wasn't particularly based on any unit, it was an average that was used during that EPIA process. So because the decision had been made at that point around which unit it would be. So this financial year, the expectation is £125,000, but obviously it's been delayed. Due to the process that's happening, and during the summer there's been a number of complaints and delays. So that's due to that process, it's going to be delayed this financial year. So I expect that we might achieve approximately 88,000 this year. And that's me assuming it would be implemented from October time rather than July. So that means a delay to the saving for this financial year. And in response to the question about can we take something else, when we developed the budget proposals this year, we were still £4 million short. So that consultation process that we went through to go out with, and there were a number of budget proposals came forward. There was £9 million approximately of kind of budget adjustments and internal adjustments that weren't affecting services, and also around £9 million that we took out to public consultation, which we deemed that would be affecting service users. Those proposals did not meet the budget gap for this year. So it wasn't as if we went out and said, here is a choice, here is £20 million in order to meet £10 million of a gap. Our gap was still £4 million short. So we as a budget working group brought forward as many proposals as we thought were deliverable. We were really open with our partners. We had regular meetings with partners indicating how we were taking forward the budget, and we were notifying them throughout that process that we felt if we had to fill that full gap, then it wouldn't be deliverable. So we were bringing forward as many proposals as we thought we could actually deliver. Unfortunately, there wasn't a package that said, here's a choice of what we might take or what we might not take. Obviously, we brought back the consultation results along with EPIAs during the business case and medium-term financial plan in March. If we don't deliver, and if there are delays to a number of proposals, then that means there's an additional burden for partners. Each of our partners have recognised the risk of £4 million. So the council's recognising a risk of approximately £2.5 million in relation to council services at the moment, and NHS Forth Valley are recognising the remainder of that risk in their budget process this year. So, and you'll hear when I talk about the budget monitoring process, so far this year, we are projecting an overspend of almost £5 million at this point. So that means we will have to use some of our contingency reserves, and also that partners will have to contribute. If we don't deliver services, and that's one of the biggest risks, I think, to our position this financial year and going into the future, is delivering any measures that were brought forward for agreement. But if we don't deliver them, then that means a higher risk of contribution from the partners, who obviously they have significant financial issues as well. Thanks, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marie. So if no one else wants to come in, can we move to decision on the motion? Sorry, Roger.
No worries. Can I just my understanding is that if we heard from the deputation there that if one of the residents in Diggers Hall were not having their needs met by the reduced quality of care due to reprovisioning, and then that resident needed to go into a residential care home, the cost of the residential care home, I understand, would be more than double of the savings that are proposed in this savings from the reprovisioning. Hence, would it not be more efficient to try to keep people out of care homes, which are so much more expensive than housing with care, and try and look at making housing with care more efficient, because we've heard how inefficient it is. Thanks.
Marie.
Obviously, it depends on the number of hours in a package of care, but traditionally, yes, a long-term care package is more expensive than an average package of care. I don't know whether Caroline maybe wants to come in to talk about the practicalities of that care continuum.
Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. So I think what I would say is we have a number of people that are living in the community out with housing with care complexes that are more complex and are getting their support from an external provider and successfully are being maintained at home. I think there's significant scope to develop the care that's delivered for people that live in Tiggotts Haugh and maintain them at home before you jump to a care home placement for individuals. I don't recognise what Roger's saying, if I'm being honest, that there's an increased risk of care home admission. People's health fluctuate and their needs change, but I don't think that will be impacted by the change in the provision of the care within Tiggotts Haugh. But we will obviously monitor that and we will make adjustments to people's care packages in a person-led way based on their assessed needs.
And Gail, do you want to come in?
Yeah. So just to say, in relation to our strategic direction, obviously our ambition is to support people to stay at home independently for as long as possible. So as officers, we wouldn't be putting forward a proposal if we thought it would lead to an increase in people needing long-term care. And certainly the other pieces of work that we're progressing, like shifting the balance of care, should give IJB members assurances that we're doing everything we can to ensure that people who are able to are supported to live independently at home for as long as possible.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else want to come in, so I think we will move to decision. So the motion calls on the Chief Officer to provide a report on the 10 points of detail that are laid out in the motion that's on the order paper. Is our voting members content to approve the motion?
Agreed.
Okay, we'll take that as approved then. So the decision of the IJB is that a report will come back to a future meeting. But in the meantime, work to re-provision Tiggotts Haugh will continue to go ahead. Thanks everyone. We've spent a fair amount of time in that matter, but it's an important issue. Can we move on to the Chief Officer's report? I think we'll take this item and then we'll perhaps have a break.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'll briefly highlight some matters that I've included within Chief Officer's report and then happy to take any questions. There are also a number of recommendations in the report. So first of all, to highlight that Elaine Beveridge, the IJB carer representative, resigned as of the 23rd of July. I think Elaine brought a great deal to the board in terms of her experience and her confidence in terms of making sure that the voice of the carers was heard to support IJB decision. So I think we'll greatly miss Elaine and want to wish her all the best and thank you for all of her input into the board. We're delighted to say that Sharon, who was the deputy carer representative, has been selected by the carers group, the Carers Voice group, to come on as the carer representative on IJB, and the IJB is asked to take a decision on that. So Sharon's been working really well as deputy carer representative, so I'm sure she will be a great addition to the board, subject to that agreement. Also, just as an update, the members will be aware that we've currently got one vacancy, the NHS representative space, and the NHS board is due to meet on the 30th of September, and it's expected they will take a decision at that time who the new NHS representative will be on the IJB board. I've obviously got quite an extensive part in housing with care, but given our conversation, I'll not go into that again. Just to highlight some care inspectorate inspections, the Dollar Park Dementia Service was recently inspected by the care inspectorate, and I think I'd like to commend the staff there for the excellent finding of that inspection. The service was evaluated as very good, that's grade 5s across all the indicators, and they found significant strengths in care provision that led to positive outcomes for individuals. In terms of carer support, Falkirk was featured in a good practice section in the recent publication by the Coalition of Carers in Scotland, Equal, Valued and Sustained. And that was a recognition of the strengths of the Falkirk Carer Representative Programme, which is delivered in partnership with Falkirk and Clackmannanshire Carer Centre. The programme aims to strengthen carer involvement in service planning and decision making through tailored training and support. And we've got 9 carer representatives that are actively contributing to strategic discussions. And I think that active contribution really helps us make sure that we're taking consideration on the impact of carers as new policies and pieces of work are taken forward. I wanted to highlight that Falkirk Council at its meeting on the 26th of June considered a motion on Young Carers Action Day. There's information in the report, and I understand Councillor Hannah and Councillor Colley might want to say a few words on that as well. So the IJB the council wrote to myself as Chief Officer seeking our consideration and support for the principles of the Young Carers Covenant within Integrated Children and Adult Services. And that also relates to a recommendation in the report. The report also provides a brief update on shifting the balance of care. So shifting the balance of care, you'll recall you received a paper on that at the last board meeting. So that's progressing well. So as of the 8th of August, through that programme, we've supported 52 people to come home. And many of these people are people who otherwise would have been going into long-term care. And we've provided that support for them to come home with wraparound support up to 24/7 and reablement and rehabilitation to support them to see whether or not we can continue to support them to live at home well with the right care levels. So we've seen a number of different improvements across the system, including the number of delayed discharges of people who are waiting to come home from hospital, the bed days occupied in NHS Forth Valley, the Forth Valley Opal tool, which is an indication of how busy and pressurised the hospital is, emergency department occupancy, the number of patients who are boarded in the hospital, so that's people who are in the hospital but maybe not in the best ward for their care needs, and the number of contingency beds in operation. We've also seen through our qualitative evaluation significant impacts from a personal perspective in terms of people being able to come home and how they feel about that. So the evaluation is continuing. We intend to bring a more comprehensive report to IJB in December on that. In terms of national updates, to highlight the Care Reform Scotland Bill, and this relates to the earlier Breaks for Carers item. So that was passed in June, and it establishes a number of things, including legal right to breaks for unpaid carers, improvements around independent advocacy, the creation of a national chief social work advisor, changes to the way that information is shared across the sector, and it also includes Anne's Law, which will ensure that care home residents will continue to be able to receive visits from their loved ones, even when there's restrictive measures in place. So happy to take any questions. Sorry, I'll just come on to the recommendations if that's okay. So the recommendations are that IJB considers and comments in the report. We thank Elaine Beveridge for her support as IJB carer representative since January this year, and approve Sharon, currently the IJB substitute carer representative, as the new IJB carer representative from today's date. Note that work is ongoing with the Carer Centre to recruit to a new IJB substitute carer representative from our current pool of carer representatives, and in relation to the Falkirk Council motion on Young Carers Action Day, to consider and support the principles of the Young Carers Covenant within Integrated Children's and Adult Services. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Are there questions or comments on the report? Councillor Hannah.
I'd just like to echo the thanks to Elaine for her support to the IJB, and to welcome Sharon, who's already making contributions to the IJB. So thank you for that. In relation to the Young Carers motion, obviously we welcome the fact that the Carers Bill has been passed, and that the right to a break is now enshrined in law for carers, and that is obviously very, very important for carers. But I would support the recommendations in terms of this. Having taken the motion to the council in the first place, haven't changed my mind. And yeah, Councillor Colley may have some more to say about that, because she is very involved with carers groups. The third thing I just wanted to comment on was the shifting the balance of care update. I've noticed that 52 people have been supported through the discharge process, and the original project aimed to do 32, so that is clearly a success story, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. Having spent a number of years looking after elderly and disabled relatives, I know very well how dangerous it is for people to stay in hospital for too long, and how important it is to get them home into their own homes at the earliest possible opportunity. And I'm really excited about this project, and I'm really looking forward to the report coming forward. And all the discharges to home will not always work, but that doesn't mean that it's not a success. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne. I'll bring Fiona in and then David.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think it sometimes surprises people that there's actually a lot of agreement in the council, despite what our meetings might look like. And the motion around the Young Carers Action Day, and the support around things like a right to break for young carers, and signing up to the covenant was supported, and so many of the councillors spoke about about young carers, whether they had been mentoring young carers, whether they'd been working with young carers, whether, like myself, they'd been a young carer. And I think that it was so widely supported, and I think I'm really pleased that Anne brought forward the motion, and I don't always second Anne's motions, but in this case I was absolutely delighted to do so, and for this to come through to the IJB.
Thanks, Fiona. Cross-party support is always good, always welcomed here. David?
Yes, thank you very much. And I found it quite interesting to read the report, and particularly the shifting of balance of care. And it's really quite exciting to see that 52 people have been managed. Are we managing that capacity well? And what's our annual target, in that area?
So thank you for the question. So I'll maybe come in to respond to that. So it's quite a complicated thing to measure. So we obviously have a budget available that was passed over by the NHS. And obviously, as we're taking people home early, not early, but when they're due to go home, I think that's really important to stress. It's not about taking people home before they're clinically well. But when we're taking people home, we're providing up to 24/7 care. What we're seeing in some instances, and we're yet to do the formal evaluation, is that people recover really much quicker than we probably anticipated. So we'd anticipated that assessment period with enhanced support to last for 21 days. We're seeing that some people actually have a significant step change in their recovery very, very quickly. So it's a balance between the additional costs of that intensive support against what the longer term, what they then go on to need. So that is quite complicated to work out. We are sort of tracking every individual to look at that, but it's a balancing act in terms of making sure we're doing that within the available budget. It's the right thing to do. And as we think about expanding it, we're thinking about people who come out of hospital with a package of care, and sometimes what they need when they're in hospital is much higher than what they'll need when they're home. When people get home, they want to be doing things for themselves. They want to get back to normal. So we would expect to see a shift in that demand. At the same time, though, our overall demands and needs are increasing. So it's that balancing act in terms of maintaining the good performance that we've seen, the good outcomes for people, but recognising that there is increasingly additional demand in our communities and needs for people as well. So we'll have a little bit more detail and data on that when we come back in December, but at the moment we're just trying to capture all of that and balance it out to make sure that we're doing it within the available budget.
Thanks, Gail. Okay, so I have Sharon, I have David Hearn and Roger. So Sharon, can I bring you in next?
Thank you. I would just like to speak about the good news about the Dollar Park Dementia Service. We've had very good feedback in the Carer Centre about people who've used the service and how good it is. And we've had one carer who's highlighted how good the documentation is there, that they've had to use the paperwork that they, so when they were starting the service, the package that they fill in was been helpful. So they've taken a copy and they're using it in other services with other users who are other service providers who are helping their care loved one. So then that's been very good, been well received and very good feedback with that. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is the opportunities that are being provided by the IJB for carer representatives to be involved in the process, not just in the IJB, but other strategic groups. So that's been good. So then that feeds into the board getting quality information. So this has been very good and well received with ourselves, the carers. And then the other thing I just want to talk about is the young carers day that was had in the council, the decision that was made by the councillors. That's very good and encouraging. So this is very good. And
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, always good to hear when things are going well, and I'm sure you'll continue to keep us right when perhaps things are not going so well. Thank you. David Hearn, can I bring you in next?
Yeah, hi. Good morning, everyone. Reading the report, the shift in the balance of care work, I mean, I want to emphasise, I think this is really good work. This is really important. 54 people going home, and it was recognised there that quite a number of them will fail and end up back in hospital, and that's fine, but they're being given the opportunity to cope at home. In the report, again, there's no mention of the impact on GP services. I would like to see it recognised in every report that there will be an impact on GP services of bringing these people home. I've joined the daily huddle, the daily meetings, and I would estimate at least 50% of the patients require some form of GP input. And this is GP input where previously these patients would have had their medical input from hospital services. So this has an impact on primary care. It will take away care opportunities from other people because we're having to deliver care to these people. So I would like to see that in every report that we see. I think it's important that we recognise it. I'm not sure there's anything we need to do about it, but I do think we need to be recognising it. This is a significant shift of medical care from a hospital ward to the community. But I still think this is the right thing to do, clearly. But I just think it needs to be recognised every time. Thanks.
Okay, point taken, David. Thank you. Roger?
Just to join in the general support for shifting the balance of care. I mean, me and the unions are generally very supportive of the principle. Just a couple of quick points building on what Anne and Fiona were saying about, yeah, sometimes we get people home quickly and that's the right thing to do, but that doesn't work out, and I think we need to recognise that is going to happen to support staff not to be risk averse in these situations, because I think there's sometimes often staff feel that they're failing if somebody for the right reasons get somebody home quickly, shifting the balance of care, and that person then doesn't cope for whatever reason. Secondly, there is a knock-on effect, as David was saying, social work as well, and I know that because of the shift of resources to shifting the balance of care, which is fine, and the shortage of social workers generally, some of the delayed discharges that we're coping with have increased, so it may have reduced some delayed discharges with other delayed discharges. So it hasn't all been, we need more staff to do the extra work. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Councillor Flynn.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'd like to touch on 5.11. It's the change in the GP systems, which I think is quite a significant change. I believe that EMIS has been around for quite a number of years, but there was a couple of points around it. Cegedim, who obviously owned the EMIS system, have pulled out. Now, my first question really is, it mentions vision. Is this a national Scottish Government system? And it mentions looking for a new provider of a similar system to EMIS. And have they found that provider? And has there been any impact on GP systems in terms of efficiency as a result of this change? Because it is quite significant. Thank you.
Sorry,
Okay, Tom.
Chair, through yourself. Sorry, I'm a wee bit throaty today. Thank you very much for the question, Councillor. Yes, just to clarify, so that there's no misunderstanding, that there was a programme to roll out Vision, and of course that had been procured through Scottish Government, and then there was an issue with the organisation rolling out that provision, and it was halted. There was no significant jeopardy in terms of the existing system. This was a modernisation programme to replace an existing system that was no longer as fit for purpose and no longer as productive as it might be, with a better version, which is of course this Vision. So there was a period of a bit of a lapse there whilst a new provider was found, and that new provider has now been identified and will recommence the rollout. And at this stage, there's no indication of where we are on that rollout process, but we will be on it, and that will then be rolled out. There is, in the meantime, no jeopardy at all in relation to existing systems. This is a modernisation. Thanks.
Okay, if there are no other questions or contributions, then I'll bring us back to the recommendations. Are we happy to approve those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you, colleagues. Can I add my thanks to Elaine for her work, and again, welcome, Sharon. Look forward to working with you over the next few years. As I said, I think this is a good time to take a break. So can I ask that we come back at 11:05? Thanks, colleagues. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll get moving again. So we're on to item number 7, which is the budget monitoring report. Marie.
Thanks, Chair. This report provides a high-level summary of the current 25-26 projected financial position, including consideration of the risks to that position. Projections are based on forecasts using monthly information available at that time, and the current forecast position is a projected overspend of 4.838 million on integrated budgets, and an overspend of 6.614 is anticipated in relation to set-aside budgets for large hospital services. Services in relation to social care are expected to overspend by 5.065 million, and services provided by NHS Forth Valley are currently expected to underspend by 227,000. For the purposes of this report, the overall projected overspend is manageable if required, with use of contingency reserves and contributions from partners, which have already been recognised as a risk for each partner as part of their budget setting processes. The table at 4.1 sets out the current budget and the projected position at high level, and appendices 2 and 3 show the more detailed information for both social care and NHS budgets. During the budget process, as I mentioned, the in-year shortfall was identified of 3.962 for the overall IGB budget, and those risks have been recognised by our partners. Section 5 gives a summary of the reserves position. Appendix 5 sets out the current detailed IGB reserves position. Earmarked reserves of 13.3 million and contingency reserves of 2.3 million were held as at the 1st of April 2025. The balance held for contingency reserves are in line with recommended levels in the IGB reserves policy, and I'll talk about a review of that reserves policy in the next paper. There are commitments in year of 10.366 million against earmarked reserves, with an expected remaining service pressures reserve of 998,000. Within the earmarked reserves balances, a figure of 1.981 million is held, being the risk share element recognised for 25-26 financial year by NHS Forth Valley, which has been added to the IGB reserves at the end of 24-25. Falkirk Council are also recognising their share of that risk, and it's being dealt with in a different way and is held within council balances and will only be expended if required. A further balance of 2.038 million is held within IGB reserves in relation to the one-off contribution towards the shift in the balance of care project, which we've heard about in Gail's Chief Officer's report. For social care, those services are projected to overspend by £5 million, and the main areas are in relation to care and support at home services, where there's an overspend expected of £600,000. This is made up of an overspend of 4.7 million in the external care and support at home packages, and is mostly offset by an expected underspend on in-house services of 4.097 million in relation to vacancies held within the in-house service. Some other significant areas of over and underspend are as follows. In-house residential care has shown a forecast overspend of 1.094 million for the year in relation to temporary staffing arrangements and agency spend. This service will be subject to review as part of the bedded care review agreed as part of the medium-term financial plan. Resource allocation panels remain in place in relation to long-term nursing and residential care places and care and support at home packages being allocated on a risk-based approach, with residential placements currently at a one-for-one approach at this time. Housing with Care currently projects to overspend by 300,000, and work is ongoing with the implementation of the budget decision, which we've been discussing this morning. Day services are projected to underspend at this stage by 331,000. An assessment and care planning has a large number of vacancies, resulting in a projected year underspend of 821,000 at this point. Development funds held are projecting to underspend by 469,000 at this time, and these along these budget lines, which is helping to offset some of the areas of overspend and is contributing to the overall position. There are two areas where we're asking the IGB to approve the decisions this morning in relation to end-of-life night nursing services delivered by Marie Curie. The senior leadership team agreed in principle to approve a contribution of 41,000 for 25-26 over and above current financial assumptions, and we're asking the IGB to approve that decision today. And advocacy services have been commissioned, and it's been led by the Forth Valley area by Clackmanagement and Stirling, HSCP, and this was brought to a senior leadership team setting out the procurement process and the required funding. The set-aside overspend projection of 6.6 million is currently anticipated, and as normal, this will be managed within the by NHS Forth Valley within the overall position. Within NHS services, there's a projected underspend of 227,000. For community healthcare services, there's an underspend projected of 1.781 million. This mainly relates to budgets for community hospitals and staff and underspends throughout services. These are offset by an overspend of 400,000 in complex care packages. Primary care services are projected to overspend by 1.5 million at this point in time in relation to the prescribing budget. This budget includes the allocation of 1.5 million of prescribing efficiencies, which are being progressed by the pharmacy team. Appendix 4 shows savings proposals agreed and gives details of whether they are now applied to budgets and updates on projected achievements at this stage, based on information at month 3. It is currently anticipated that 360,000 of agreed efficiencies will not be achievable this financial year, as set out in Appendix 4, but this will continue to be monitored and updates brought to the IJB. Delivery of these transformation proposals remains a high risk to the in-year financial position and are being taken forward through our strategic planning and transformation board. Section 7 sets out the risks to the in-year financial position. As set out in the business case and medium-term financial plan paper in March, partners are continuing to face extremely challenging financial positions as well, and there are a number of risks set out at 7.3 through to 7.9. The main areas of which are around contingency reserves and continued reduction of contingency reserves, demand for care and support at home, job evaluations of staff. So the care staff job evaluation has been agreed now, but a number of other roles have been submitted for evaluation. So that poses a risk, and these costs are not included in the current financial projections. The volatility of prescribing costs and the demands for new medicines also pose a risk to the financial position. And in relation to the primary care improvement plan, activity is currently overcommitted on a recurring basis. An exercise is underway to confirm the extent of this overcommitment, and a separate report will be brought to IJB in due course and updated in the next financial position reported. Pay awards also remain a risk, and obviously the council pay award has been agreed at 4% for this financial year and 3.5% moving forward. So these increased approvals will need to be included in future financial positions as well. So in summary, an overspend of 4.8 million is currently projected on the integrated budget and an overspend of 6.6 million on the set-aside budget. At this stage, the level of contingency reserves and recognition of potential risk shared by partners would be sufficient to address the overspend. However, work will require to continue to reduce this and minimise any contributions where possible, including consideration of use of remaining service pressure reserves. And I'll just go back to the recommendations. So we're asking the IJB today to note the current projected position for the integrated budgets and set-aside services, note the non-recurring reserves position set out in Appendix 5, approve the additional payment of 41,000 to Marie Curie for 25-26 on a one-off basis, approve the additional inflationary element of the Falkirk contribution to the Forth Valley-wide advocacy provision for the period 24 through to 27 as set in paragraph 6.1, and authorise the Chief Officer to issue revised directions to Falkirk Council and NHS Forth Valley as per the directions provided at Appendix 6. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Marie. There's a tremendous amount of detail there, and also not insignificant risk in terms of the financial position we're in, as we know. Other questions from members? David.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Marie, for this report. It's really quite difficult to read. I think most of us still are fearful of numbers from school days. But having looked at it, looked at the narrative that you use in there, I find this quite concerning about the financial position. The rest of the documentation we have in front of us tends to be very productive, and it's quite exciting in terms of service redesign and remodelling, and that's an exciting thing for the service users that we're likely, well, I'm here to help represent. I suppose I was astonished about the portfolio of activity carried out by the IJB. I didn't really think it was as wide as that. However, going back into the finance situations, I know at the end of Q1, most of the cost centres are actually overdrawn significantly. Why are they overdrawn so much after Q1? What is that look like at the outturn if they continue to spend at that level?
So obviously what I've set out there, David, thanks for your question, is that the projection at this point in time is that it will be £4.8 million. So obviously when we built up the budget, we include all of the pressures that we anticipate for this financial year. We include the assumptions around those savings proposals that were required to deliver this financial year. So as at Q1, at this point in time, that overspend. So I suppose when we agreed the budget, we knew there was an overcommitment of £4 million straight away. So that's included in that £4.8 million. So we understand that there was an overcommitment. So for me, and I'm not saying that's good news, but for me, the 800,000 is over and above that 4 million that we expected. So it's that 800,000 part that we're needing to manage at this point in time. The partners are recognising that risk of 4 million, so we know that money is there if required. They will expect us to minimise that as much as possible. And we also have contingency reserves that we can use this year. But obviously, each time that I come with a financial strategy or talk about the budget, we need to move away from using those non-recurring reserves as much as possible. So whilst yes, it's concerning that it's £4.8 million of an overspend, we know we have that £4 million of the risk share from the partners at the moment, and we'll need to move towards minimising that position as much as possible as we move through. It is concerning. It's really challenging. You know, you're talking about the concerns around the risk, etc. There are a number of risks there that may come to fruition that are not included in this position at this point in time. So that may mean that we have to bring additional budget recovery measures later in the year. And we're already we implemented a number of budget recovery measures last year, which are continuing. For example, vacancy panels, for example, resource allocation panels, and it may be that we'll have to go further if the position worsens, unfortunately. But it is extremely challenging. But the management team are working towards trying to minimise that risk as much as possible. I hope that helps.
Thanks very much. Given the financial state and the longitudinal elements of the financial state, not just in this fiscal year, are we at a level where we might have to consider divesting or retrenching some of our operations?
So I don't know whether Gail might want to come in. I suppose
because my concern is for the service users. Are they going to lose in the medium and long term?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the medium-term financial plan. In the next paper, we'll talk about that. The thing is that we need to make sure that we're providing care for all of the people who absolutely need it. So we absolutely do have to take that strategic view and look whole system. You know, we've talked about shifting the balance of care this morning. I think it's about making sure that we're looking at the whole system, bringing forward transformation proposals that are using the resources in the best way possible to make sure that as many people are receiving care as they possibly need. I'll probably let Gail come in.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that is the challenge in terms of how do we ensure that our resources ensure that we're able to continue to provide essential health and social care support to people that need it in Falkirk. So that does require us to redesign and modernise service provision, which does result in change, which is difficult for everybody involved. So what we're trying to do is to come up with, we have a budget savings plan that's already been approved, but to do that in a way that allows us to protect the essential resources for the essential services. It's also important we consider how we support people to stay well and healthy and independent for as long as possible. So that early intervention and prevention is typically what we call that. But how do we make sure we've still got some resource there? Because otherwise we're just heading towards that increasingly more challenging position. So it is really challenging. There's no doubt there have been and there will continue to be difficult decisions that we'll bring forward to IJB. It will involve change, it will have an impact on people, but we're trying to move towards a position whereby we are sustainable now and into the future to make sure that people in Falkirk who do need community health and social care get the support they need.
Thanks, David. No, it's a helpful challenge, and it's good to bring us back to that core point. I mean, we reached the stage where we couldn't just keep on doing what we were doing as demand and costs rose. So transformation is about better services, but hopefully about better use of resources as well. Councillor.
I think Councillor Colley was first, to be fair.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. I've got a kind of bigger question and probably quite a little question just on one of the recommendations. I suppose that, you know, we've talked about the risk to the partners, and obviously we are board members, but we're also appointed by the council, and I have a dual role on the NHS board as well. And I suppose what do those, I suppose it's like trying to put in a bit in words, because you can't decide what the decisions of council, etc. But what those risks, if that 4 million comes to pass, or even more, is to the council. And I don't know, is that around services? Is it around greater council tax? Is it both? You know, just to get a bit of a flavour of what that means, because, you know, what David say, I think that these are the things that I don't know how you sleep at night. I know that these decisions that we're being asked to make are hard, but trying to make that that plan for the future is really, really challenging. So I do want to say I really appreciate all the work that you and all the team are doing on this. But so that was the big question, and the little question was just to say about the end of life night nursing, which is a valuable service, but whether you can say a little bit more about it.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I'll answer the big question, and we'll see who might come in around that, the palliative end of life care question. So yeah, that, you know, there is a risk there. You know, that I've set out those risks, and they are real and challenging. I suppose just to put in context that each 1% of council tax is approximately £900,000. So if we were going to ask for additional funds, or that those risks came to fruition and we needed additional funding, each £900,000 of the additional funding is 1% of council tax. So, you know, that would be the impact, I suppose, if there weren't reserves held around the amount of funding that we needed. We'll continue those discussions with partners around that financial position, and as I say, they will expect us to minimise that as much as possible and probably exhaust our reserves before we did that. But it is a continuing risk, and in the longer term, you know, as we move forward with the budget strategy, we'll have to add another year's pressures onto our gap, which I'll bring back to the next IJB. But just to put it in context, that would be the amount, if that's the additional risk.
I'll maybe come in just to talk briefly about the palliative and end of life care, and then Nicola Wood, Chief Nurse, might want to come in just a little bit more detail about what that service does. So obviously we've agreed a palliative and end of life strategic plan. We're working on the implementation plan for that. So the expectation is that the implementation plan sits within the available resources, but while we're moving towards that, we've got a gap, and hence the recommendation today. But maybe hand over to Nicola, and you can talk a little bit more about what that service does.
Yes, thanks, Gail, and thanks for the question. You might be aware that we've got various services that support people with palliative and end-of-life care needs throughout the course of the day, but overnight, actually, Marie Curie are the only service out with the night nursing team that provide that support overnight. And as we know, that an overnight period can be extremely challenging for people with care needs, especially those who are at end-of-life care. So the service that Marie Curie deliver is extremely, beneficial and of high value. And whilst we're waiting on the commissioning consortium progressing the work, as Gail's just mentioned, we recognised that there was a risk that we didn't have enough hours in the service to meet the demand that we had. So that's why the proposal was put forward to support that service with a bit of an additional funding to get us through the financial year whilst the wider.
Okay, thanks for that additional information, Nicola. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. I want to say, first of all, thank you to Marie and all her team for doing this. The financial reports that Marie brings forward are very, very, very depressing, and have been for the whole time she's been in this position. But she does it very succinctly and does it and writes her reports very clearly. So I want to say thank you for that. When I first came onto the IJB and started reading the financial reports, my first question was, when do I get my magic wand? And that's what this feels like. And I'm still waiting for my magic wand. Because the level of demand that is coming for health and social care services versus the resources that are available is a challenge that I find terrifying. So the decisions that we're asked to make are often not very pleasant. That was just a kind of reiteration a bit of what David was saying. But the questions that I wanted to address, I wonder if you could say a wee bit more about reserves. I think that sometimes the public think, oh, but you've got reserves available. Now, I think COVID showed us why you have to have reserves available. But I think it would be useful if you could say a little more about the reserves position and how risky it is if we start to dig into that. And the second question I'd like to address is, you mentioned the one-for-one approach on residential care. I wonder if you could say a little more about that, because I was very uncomfortable over the past period on the IJB when we moved to a 2-for-1 position. Are we going to be able to, could you say a little more about what that means, and are we going to be able to maintain the 1-for-1?
Yeah, and thanks, Councillor Hannah, for your questions. In relation to the reserves position, obviously I've set out that opening balance, but there are a number of commitments against the reserves. So we may be saying there's £15 million in reserves at the beginning of the year, 2.3 of which is our contingency reserve. So our reserves policy says that we should hold 0.75% of our budget as a contingency reserve, and that's what we've managed to do, whilst at Q3 last year we thought we wouldn't be able to do that. So that's a positive that we have those contingency reserves available this year. But there's over £10 million is actually committed for specific projects in there. So, for example, partnership funds this year, we're using £760,000 of one-off reserves this year to fund partnership fund spend. We've just heard about Marie Curie, which is a one-off amount that's being funded this year. There are a number of areas which we're still supporting on a one-off basis, or a number of specific items which have to be spent for that purpose. So for their intended purpose. So for example, primary care money, any underspend there will be utilised towards primary care this financial year. I've talked about the overcommitment in primary care, so those reserves are expected to run out this year as well, whilst we have to move towards having a more sustainable position for that as well. Shifting the balance of care is held in there, so that will all be expended this year. The risk share amount from NHS Forth Valley is, that's just under 2 million. I expect we'll have to use that this year. So there are really chunky numbers in there where, yes, it's held in the one-off reserves at the beginning of the year, but it will be expended by the time we get to the end of the year. So actually, our true contingency reserve of 2.3 million is there, and we have a service pressure reserve, which is uncommitted of just under £1 million. So those are what is available. It's not that £15 million is available. We have a number of projects ongoing that we must spend that money on this year. So that true contingency is 2.3 million, and there's service pressure reserves of approximately 900. Now, we will have to come up with decisions as a finance oversight group moving towards that budget of how to perhaps use some of those reserves. And we'll be bringing a paper back next time around that as well. So there are a lot of commitments in there so when we get to the end of this financial year, that would be much more depleted than it looks at this point in time. So there is, there is a real risk around us continuing to use non-recurring reserves. We have to come up with recurring solutions to become financially sustainable in that regard. Gail, did you want to come in there? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to come back to the other question you asked around the 2-for-1 or 1-for-1 into care homes. So we have moved on to 1-to-1 over the summer period. Generally, the turnover in care homes is lower over the summer, but the demand doesn't change throughout the year. So I think the honest answer is we'll keep it under review. Our view, what we need to do is to balance the demands in the community, in the hospital, with the available resource and in the context of our financial resource. So we need to, and to be fair, last winter we also were really mindful of, the 2-for-1 approach that we put in place, was that leading to harms and things like that. So we kept that under really close review. So if we do move back to that position, we'll continue to consider really closely what the impacts are and modify our position as required. And last year, for example, around managing the amount of care at home hours available, we saw very quickly there was an increase in the number of people who were delayed in their discharge. So we modified that approach very quickly to respond to that. So I think the assurance I'll give you is, we can't say we're not going to do it. We might very well have to, but we'll monitor the impact of that and take appropriate actions to, with that person-centred approach as much as we can.
Thank you. I look forward to my wand arriving.
Yeah, we could all do with one of those, I think. Roger, can I bring you next?
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to take a little bit of issue with some of the wording in your report, Marie. In 7.5, it looks to me as if you're blaming the unions for making claims of unequal pay. What really happens is that groups of staff, and this happens fairly frequently, and some often understandably take on extra responsibilities and extra roles, and then they come to the union representatives and say, well, hold on, we've just taken, for the last year or so, we've been taking on extra responsibilities and we're getting paid less than other people taking on that level of responsibility. So I don't think it's fair to blame the unions for equal pay claims.
Thanks, Roger. Absolutely, that's not the intention at all. It just meant that they had been submitted by the unions. It didn't mean that they were driving it and it wasn't the staff, that it wasn't a staff issue, but it was just to say that they had been received by the unions. That's not my intention to say that it's the union's fault at all.
Okay, thanks, Marie. So if there are no other questions, then I'll bring us to the recommendations. So a couple to note: approving the payment. Oh, sorry, David.
Might I ask just one question? In page 45, you highlight the risks, Marie. You said in order for the board to get a fuller picture, and it's a thought really, would it be useful in each board meeting to have the full risk register discussed?
So the risk register, it's actually part of the terms of reference for the Performance Audit and Assurance Committee. So they consider it quarterly. So it'll come to the next PAC meeting. So the members of that committee consider the strategic risk register, and it comes to the IJB twice yearly. So it will come twice annually as well to the full board as well. So that's part of the terms of reference.
Thank you. That's it, correct?
And it's worth noting that the financial risk is at the highest level it could be, not surprisingly. Okay, can I bring us then to the recommendations? So a couple to note: approve the payment to Marie Curie, approve the inflationary element in relation to Forth Valley-wide advocacy, and authorise the Chief Officer to issue revised directions. Are we happy to approve those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 8 then is the budget strategy paper. That's yourself again.
Thanks, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to advise the IJB of the proposed approach to approving the 26/7 revenue budget and medium-term financial plan setting process. The IJB requires to approve its approach to identify the key assumptions for funding from both Forth Valley Health Board and Falkirk Council. It is anticipated that the Health Board funding will be based on 25-26 funding plus a percentage uplift to reflect the Agenda for Change pay uplift. The Council delegated budget is expected to be based on the 25-26 funding, plus any passported funding directly from Scottish Government in relation to Scottish living wage, with no uplift expected at this stage for the Council pay award. It is not anticipated that the Council or Health Board will fund any additional pressures for 26/7. The IJB budget process will also include financial planning for children and families and justice services and prison healthcare budgets moving forward, and they will be incorporated as papers are brought forward. The Finance Oversight Group and Senior Management Team will consider any emerging additional pressures affecting the financial position and will work towards presenting proposals to bridge any gap for 26/7 and for the continued longer-term planning. At 4.5, in March 2026, the IJB agreed the 25-26 business case and medium-term financial plan, which included a 3-year plan to move towards financial sustainability, and which still identified a cumulative gap over the 3 years of 1.158 million up to 27-28 in the high level positions set out in the table at 4.5. For 25-26 financial year, as I've mentioned, the one-off gap was identified of 3.962, and the Council and NHS Forth Valley agreed to identify this risk within their respective budget papers and positions. For 26-7, there remains a cumulative budget gap of 1.988 million. This is prior to identifying any additional emerging pressures. During the budget process for 26-7 financial year, the Oversight Group will consider any potential solutions to this gap for the year, whilst working towards addressing this and any additional emerging pressures on a recurring basis. This will include a review of any remaining reserves balances, if appropriate. At present, we expect to receive similar resource allocation from the Health Board, and will continue to pass through funding for any. They will continue to pass through any funding for Agenda for Change pay award and inflationary uplifts for any other appropriate budgets as in previous years. And again, as I've mentioned, for the purpose of this paper, it is assumed that any pressures to be funded in relation to set aside budget for large hospital services will continue to be managed by NHS Forth Valley. The approach to the social care element of the budget is as follows. The start point for 26-7 council contribution to the IJB is the current approved contribution and no new pressures funding to be allocated. It is proposed that the budget process will be progressed by the Finance Oversight Group, and the medium-term financial plan will be expanded to include 28-29 financial year, and a review of the financial plan assumptions will be carried out to ensure the most relevant data is captured and included in the plan, and that any associated budget gaps to be addressed and sensitivity analysis are current. As the budget process progresses, any further savings proposals and transformational change options are required to be developed, and development sessions will again be held for all IGB members to allow them to review progress and examine the proposals along with any relevant impact assessments. As with the previous business case proposals, a period of consultation will be carried out if appropriate, and transformation proposals required to move forward for any transformation proposals required to move towards balancing the medium-term plan. A lessons learned exercise looking at the 25-26 budget consultation and engagement process is currently underway, and members have been engaged in IGB development sessions around that, and all elected members will also receive questionnaires, as are the senior management team and other managers involved in the process, and that will be incorporated into the process moving forward. Proposals for the funding envelope for partnership funds will be brought back to the next IGB, and a review of the reserve strategy has been carried out as part of this budget strategy paper and is included at Appendix 1. I have reviewed the policy, and I did not consider that any substantive changes were required at this time, other than some minor changes highlighted in Appendix 1. Despite the current financial challenges, I didn't think it prudent to reduce the required reserves held below the 0.75% recommended amount. I think it would be difficult, given the overall budget gap and required transformation programme, to plan any increases at this time. The Financial Oversight Group will review estimated 26-7 medium-term cost pressures during September 25. And again, I've mentioned the number of information services sessions have been planned with members and all elected members. The indicative timelines are set out at 4.26, and the additional pressures and risks from 4.27 onwards. And those are similar to those I've already set out in the Budget Monitoring Report around demand for care and support at home, long-term care placements. The National Care Home contract is also mentioned there. Negotiations around that contract become more difficult year on year, so it's important to recognise that as a risk as well. Provider pressures are also noted in the risk section, and the pay awards, as I've already mentioned, in the Agenda for Change. Also, the Primary Care Improvement Programme, again, that's a repeat of what I've mentioned in the Budget Monitoring Report, and that's an ongoing risk around the sustainability of that service as well, because there's an overcommitment there on a recurring basis. And again, I've mentioned the job evaluations in this paper as well. Thanks very much. I'm happy to take any questions on the strategy that anybody might have.
Thanks, Maria. That's very clear. It doesn't get any easier next year, does it? Okay, other questions or comments, colleagues? Councillor.
Thank you, Convener. You made reference to the integration of the children's social work services. I wonder if you could say a little more about the financial risks that are associated with that. And the basic principle is absolutely the correct one in my view, but I'm aware of a financial issue.
Yeah, so the council have removed the pressures from their financial strategy at the moment, and they had identified approximately 6 million over 5 years. So we will require to build that into our pressures as I bring forward the next paper. So we'll be looking to do that. The work of the Closer to Home board continues around trying to mitigate those pressures and bring children closer to home rather than those more expensive out with authority placements. And that board meets regularly and is moving towards trying bringing forward a medium-term financial plan in its own regard, which will be fed into our financial strategy as well. I hope that helps.
Good luck with Closer to Home.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Colley.
Yeah, I suppose the question around contingency reserves, and I suppose are we seeing greater level of provider stress and provider pressure starting to come through the system, and I suppose maybe expressing that risk a little bit in a little more detail on that, but also, and this might be there might not be an answer, but obviously next year we go into a Scottish parliamentary election and a new government of whatever type, and is that likely to have knock-on effects on the budget and your experience, and particularly around things like that, contracting some of those negotiations, but trying to get them over the line to be able to manage your assumptions for budget planning?
Yeah, so around contingency reserves, so I think that recommended level that we have of the 2.3 million, if we continue to use non-recurring reserves, there's a real risk around that position, and the further down that goes, and the more use of that contingency reserve, the higher the risk is for our partners around those contingency reserves. I think that recommended level of 0.75% has been there for a long time, been there for a number of years, and obviously I've reviewed the policy as part of today's paper, and I think it'd be very diverse. So I think that's a reasonable assumption at the moment, is that we try to maintain those reserves. I think that would be positive for me if we can try and maintain them. Around the provider pressures, obviously as part of this year's budget process, what we did was one of the measures that we brought forward was to remove the non-pay uplift for providers. So at the moment we are only passing on Scottish Living Wage uplifts, and the providers are raising concerns around employers' NI contributions. So obviously that's been implemented this year. Gail and I have been part of a number of national conversations with Scottish Government, COSLA and providers around those pressures that they are seeing. Locally, it's been highlighted at provider forums, and providers are telling us about those pressures. There's no particular issues that we're seeing right now from any particular providers around sustainability. We are receiving requests for increased uplifts, but we're dealing with them as and when they're coming in. But we are recommending what the IJB has approved, which is the Scottish Living Wage uplift. There are some areas that there's a deviation from that. So where there's a Scotland Excel contract, we're bound by what the Scotland Excel agreement is, and obviously for the National Care Home contract as well, we're bound by that agreement, that national agreement. In relation to the upcoming election, I think that's a difficult one. I think I think those pressures are going to be there regardless of what happens during that election. And I think those pressures will remain. Obviously, what I'll do is I will continue to update those assumptions based on the latest information that we're getting. I'll continue to liaise with the CFO networks. So Scottish Government attend our Chief Finance Officer network regularly. So we meet bi-monthly, and Scottish Government are always in attendance. So they keep us abreast of any developments, and COSLA are always in attendance as well. So as and when any information's coming through, I will absolutely be updating assumptions based on any information that we're receiving, and it's a really good forum for us to use to understand any emerging risks and issues. Hopefully that's answered your questions.
Thanks, Marie. Sharon?
I just want to ask something about the budget consultation period. And I've noticed and here is saying the consultation will be taking place if appropriate. What circumstances will it be appropriate for the consultation not to take place or take place?
Thanks for your question, Sharon. So obviously when we brought the budget in March, there was a 3-year plan in March. So we have actually agreed some measures over a 3-year period. So there are some reviews already set out in that financial plan, which have been agreed by the IJB, and we just require to bring them forward. So those will be subject to any individual consultation that's required. But for any new proposals that we bring forward, it will depend on what those proposals are. So if we expect that they'll either affect service users, then we would to public consultation with them. If they are not, if it's budget areas of budget adjustment. So for example, last year there were a number of budgets were underspending, so we removed underspends. You know, if there were recurring underspends, we just removed them. So they weren't affecting service users. It wasn't a change to any service that was being provided. So they weren't subject to public consultation. So it depends on what the proposals are that are being brought forward. We would then decide which ones were appropriate for any public consultation or not. And we'll keep the IJB informed of those proposals as they come forward. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David?
Thanks, Chair. Can I ask a question about primary care improvement programmes? From a user's perspective, that's key to accessing healthcare at all times. Is that under threat in the current situation?
So I might just talk about the financial position, and then Tom might come in and just talk specifically about the programme. So at the moment, when the service was delegated over to the IJB, there was an overcommitment in the service. So the staffing budgets that are within that programme are more than the available funding. And there was a decision made at a point in time on the basis that they expected additional funding to come forward, and that hasn't happened. So there is an overcommitment there. We are looking at that at the moment to try and quantify what that overcommitment is, and we're going through what assumptions we can make around staff turnover and things like that, and how the programme's split. So we will need to bring back a paper to the IJB setting out what that overcommitment is and any options to bring it back within budget. If we can't bring it back within budget, that then becomes a pressure for the overall budget. That then means additional efficiencies would be required to fund that. So I don't know if Tom maybe wants to come in and just talk specifically more about the programme.
Thank you, through yourself, Chair. For those unfamiliar, the primary care improvement plan and activity in relation to its funding, so there's obviously an underlying element of the extent to which it has been fully funded. It's not for me to comment on, but that has been around for some time. And in terms of the measurable impact that can be made on people's lives within primary care and how that relates to some of the services that come under the PSIP, as we tend to refer to it. In terms of it living within its means, it's quite a complex dynamic, as folk will understand, because we have 47 practices across Forth Valley there, with one exception, all independent businesses. So any attempt to reduce the numbers of people involved in primary care and the PSIP would have an immediate adverse effect on singular practices or a couple of practices in a particular cohort, rather than be spread across the whole of the establishment. So that's quite a complex dynamic. So on the assumption that it has to live within its means, and I say that because, of course, there are conversations that are taking place in relation to government, etc., around about the overall funding and impact and prospects of PSIP. Assuming it has to live within its means, then I think there is a whole system review required around about the prioritisation of what we do within the PSIP funding. And that will mean a significant reevaluation of the elements of major impact, lesser impact, elements of priority, etc., and then how that works across a large estate. So that doesn't give you much in terms of certainty, but I suppose it's just to acknowledge that there is a good understanding of the underlying opportunities around about PSAP, the challenges of it as it is, and the other challenges that would be around about if it were to be reduced in any way in terms of its funding. But there's a group, there's a PSAP oversight group, and obviously a number of other conversations taking place in relation to how this can be managed. But there's an absolute acknowledgement that in terms of the IJB's financial position, that this has to be taken very seriously.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, then we'll move to the recommendations. So being asked to approve the proposed approach to the budget and medium-term financial plan, note the pressures and risks and future reports to come, approve the small changes to the reserve strategy that Marie has mentioned, and note that further review will be carried out by 2028 at the latest. Are we happy to approve those recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Thanks for those, Marie. We move on then to item 9, which is the review of the strategic plan. Tom.
Thank you very much, Chair. Members will know that not only we're galloping towards Christmas, but July next year brings the end of the current relevant period for our strategic plan. The strategic plan is, of course, as again members will well know, is deeply embedded within the original Public Bodies Act and requires a strategic plan to be in place of a minimum period, a relevant period of 3 years. You can, of course, go longer than that, but you have to have a specified relevant period. And July next year sees the end of our current relevant period. And I wanted to take just a few moments to describe, I guess, the journey we've been on in relation to strategic plan. And incidentally, for those anoraks amongst you, it is now technically called the strategic plan. It was originally called the strategic commissioning plan, but the intent of the definition behind the word commissioning was a much broader definition of community inclusion than what people tend to think of as the word commissioning, which is linked to procurement, etc. And so they never got that, and they never really wanted that procurement paper. So over time, they've acknowledged that, and it's now just straightforwardly called a strategic plan. Sorry about that. I just felt as if I had to share that. The original strategic plan for Falkirk was in 2016, a time in which integration was forming and storming. And I guess at that point, there was a bit of a brain dump onto the page from both NHS Community Services and the councils, adult social care services, in relation to here's how we might play nice with each other and all of the things we do. It was a bit of a show and tell. Those documents at that time were monstrous. Some of them were 100, 150 pages. Trust me, I read every single one. So that there were enormous documents that kind of just show and tell. In 2019 was our next relevant period, and at 2019 there was felt at that time that it was just needing to be a bit crisper and crystallised, and that's what was then done. It should have been one in 2022, but in 2022, as we all know, we were where we were, and so in 2023 there was then the new relevant period established. That at that point, understandably, we were in that what's the post COVID consequentials of all of this? What's now going to happen? What's the long-term implications? So at that time, it was a bit more speculative around about what has all this meant to us and where are we now? We are now at the period in which I think is, not just myself, but I know others feel the same, now is the time for us to kind of reevaluate where we are. There have been significant changes. Today demonstrates very, very well some of the changing and dynamic environment that we're now all experiencing and have experienced that now brings to bear itself. I've just referred to the pandemic. We have the current economic climate, which is becoming increasingly challenging and concerning. We also have at the moment the process in relation to the adoption of children, the development of children's services into the partnership. And of course, that strategic alignment is now something we need to give significant consideration to. And of course, we now have, and we're all delighted with it, is the rollout of the locality plans. And of course, the current situation, the current strategic plan takes no account of that. And actually, those actually become significant engine rooms of what we want to see delivered in terms of strategic. So there's no account of that. So the opportunity at the moment is twofold. One, the statutory requirement is that we review the strategic plan, and we can conclude that with tweaks, with refocusing, etc., we then continue for a new relevant period. The other opportunity is that we reset our strategic plan, effectively start a new one. Given what I've said, I think there is sufficient context, changes and dynamics going forward to merit consideration around about an all new strategic plan. And I say that twofold. One is that the dynamics that I've just described. But secondly, I think it's also an opportunity for us to go back out from scratch again, dynamically to talk to our civic people, our population, about where we are, cards on the table, what this looks like going forward, and what are the myriad of choices, and therefore restate our strategic objectives through that vehicle. I think it's a good opportunity to do that now at a time in which we all feel there's a lot of things that now feel certain and a lot of things that might continue to be uncertain. And I do think that's an opportunity. So the recommendation through the process that we undertook recently to review the existing strategic plan, the recommendation coming out of that process is that we commence a new strategic plan with the intention of that being in place for the nearest IJB in July next year. So there'll be no intended gap. We've already begun the strategic needs assessment work. We already, of course, recognise that fundamentally we're in the same ballpark in terms of our strategic themes. And I've kind of listed a few of them here, and I'll just run over them again, and if that came out of the process. But it's also, I've re-gone back over all of the current strategic plans across the country. So integration and collaboration, prevention, early intervention, person-centred and strengths-based care, locality planning and community engagement, data-driven decision-making, whole life approaches and reducing inequalities. So we would probably all recognise that nothing's going to move from that place that we've already doing in terms of strategic themes, but there has to be big questions over what we're prioritising and the focus of our intentions. And that, I think that's one of the justifications. So the recommendation is that we consider an all-new strategic plan. I'll stop there. I'm one of those people that's reluctant to speak, and then when I start, I don't want to stop. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tom. I think that's very clear. Other comments or questions? Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, Convener. I absolutely agree that there's a need for a blank page to start off with in terms of the strategic plan. I think we have all been frustrated by the aims of the Integration Joint Board, and this is not just here in Falkirk area, it's across the whole of Scotland, not having achieved the level of integration or the level of shifting in terms of the balance of care over the past 10 years or so. So I think we do need to address that. But I wondered if you would like to say a wee bit more about how through the strategic plan we can actually address some of those issues about prevention, about moving more towards early intervention, and how through the strategic plan you can put into place something robust that is going to help the Health and Social Care Partnership to move into that area.
Yeah, through yourself, Chair. I think that's a very, very good question. Thank you, Councillor Hannah. I think that's why this is one of those big opportunities. I think in terms of the civic conversation, there needs to be a kind of cards on the table about reciprocal responsibility. And all the reciprocity elements are around about what is it we do, and importantly, what are we agreeing that people are individually and collectively responsible for, and what that partnership of meeting that, binding that together to meet people's needs, what does that look like? So I think we only get to prevention and early intervention and community capacity building if we have a genuine narrative around about what does that mean, what does it look like, and how do we all collaborate with that. So I think at the moment, if we just almost kind of, well, just to make sure we put that into the new strategic plan, apart from anything else, I don't think anybody's going to read a new, very sorry folks, but nobody's going to read a new strategic plan because they'll just think it's the old one reheated, right? I think this is an opportunity to us quite boldly go out there and start a proper conversation and establish some kind of civic pact with our population around about expectations, managing expectations, the partnership approach around about how we meet needs and what that looks like for people in meaningful terms. I think that opportunity is one not to be missed. So it's about acknowledging all those things that we want to achieve, but now actually going out and having cards on the table, honest conversations about it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Colley.
Yeah, it's just around the engagement and consultation. I think I'm in agreement around not the need to start again, but the need to start with a new page. Given the additional responsibilities that the IJB has taken on in relation to prison healthcare and justice services, thinking about who is involved in terms of in that engagement and consultation, which may be part of the wider community plan and partnership. And it was just for some assurance that the organisations like Police Scotland, the Fire Service, Scottish Prison Service will have some engagement to be able to ensure that their views are part of it.
So I suppose when we're describing our engagement and consultation, we're looking to take that step further in terms of co-production and co-design. So I think in terms of who the key stakeholders are, so anyone that has a stake will not on an individual basis, but a stakeholder grouping, we would seek to engage and encourage participation to help us shape the direction we move forward. Because I think it's really, we all know the conflict we have around our ambitions and the available resource. So it's really important we take people on that journey with us. So there's an understanding when there's difficult decisions about why the difficult decisions. So absolutely around justice, prison, healthcare. Obviously, there's conversations happening nationally at an early stage around social care in prisons. What does that look like? So I think there's absolutely that opportunity. And we've got really good relationships across our prison healthcare and prison services to support those conversations to happen.
Let me come back in. I think it's important, particularly when a public meeting, to emphasise that this is figuratively a blank sheet of paper, but not literally a blank sheet of paper. Because of course we have not only a lot of well-established learning and intelligence around about what the priorities should be, and they're broadly agreed. I think the blank sheet of paper is about that level of engagement and co-production around about, if we're all agreeing these are the things, we're not going to go off in tangents here in terms of meeting needs, etc. But we probably need an honest conversation around about what that looks like, how realistic it is, and how we reprioritise elements around about instead of direct delivery or direct commission service, and an assumption around about all needs will be met in every circumstance. Otherwise, that people see that as a problem, that we get into that place, which is an acknowledgement that everybody has to play their part, and that we figure in there. So I think it's just important note, so that there's not a kind of what would you like us to do open.
Okay, so new page, but not necessarily a new book. Okay, I think the consensus seems to be agreement, but can I just ask formally that we agree the recommendation to initiate process of developing a new plan and authorise directions to make that happen? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on then to item 10, which is the NHS Forth Valley Mental Health and Wellbeing Plan. Joining us is Dr. Jennifer Bothwick. Jen.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here to talk to the Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategic Plan. I'm not as advertised on your agenda a Senior Planning Manager. I'm the Director of Psychology, Mental Health and Learning Disability Services. Unfortunately, Paul Smith from Planning couldn't be here, so please don't ask me any difficult planning questions. So you should hopefully all have had sight of the strategic plan, so I'm not going to talk in detail about that. As you can see, it's a very comprehensive plan. It's been about a year in the making. After we got agreement from both IGBs and from NHS Forth Valley that we would develop and create a Forth Valley-wide mental health and wellbeing strategic plan. We did this through wide stakeholder engagement with over 40 different groups of people, with staff, with service users, with carers, with third sector providers as well. And what you see in front of you is a result of all of that collaboration over several months. There's probably just a few things I'd like to maybe point out, I think, to start with. One of the things we get asked a lot about when we've been talking to people about this is, yes, but what about the money? Because obviously we're aware that mental health and wellbeing needs are growing. The level of demand for support for people is exponentially growing, but the resource to provide that isn't. And that's the reality. What we need to do is we need to deliver better, more comprehensive services, but within the financial parameters that we've got currently. And that's what the strategic plan is part of an attempt to do. It should help us prioritise, help us agree what it is we want to spend the resource that we've got on. We need to look at this carefully. If we want to deliver, and one of the aims that's in the strategic plan you'll see, is to commission more effective, more consistent services to work with people with mild to moderate difficulties in the space between sort of primary care and secondary care specialist mental health services. If we want to do that, we don't have new money to do that, so we have to look at how we realign, how we shift balance of care to use a well-known phrase. So that's one of the key aims. You'll also see that the strategic plan is structured around prevent, promote and provide, 3 key pillars of care. And that's about making sure that we give equal attention to the promotion of positive mental health and wellbeing, the prevention of poor mental health and wellbeing, and the provision of services who need it. This isn't an either or. We need to pay attention to all of these, and hopefully that's fed through in the plan. The next stage we need to move on to is the implementation plan, and that's where we then get into the meat of this. And what we've got here are some key actions, some high-level principles. If this is agreed, what we then go on to is move into the implementation phase, and you'll see in the plan we've laid out an outline structure of how we think we might do that, but there's further work to be done on developing that. And that will then lead to the development of clear implementation plans with timelines, with outcomes, and with measurable, deliverable outcomes, which is really, really important as well. And that will be the next stage. There was a couple of key things that also fed through all of our engagement was that this needs to be Forth Valley wide. And that was a really strong message, that we needed a Forth Valley wide plan that was broad enough to take into consideration the needs across Forth Valley, but also allowed for enough local variation to support the differing needs of our differing populations. And we know that there are differing needs of the differing populations. The strategic needs assessment work we did clearly shows that. And again, we've pulled through some of the key highlight messages in the report, but we do have about 130 pages of more detailed strategic needs assessment. If anybody really wants to see that, we're happy to share. Another key message that came through was that this needed to be an all-age strategic plan, and that this should include children and young people's needs as well. That presents some operational challenges when it comes to delivering, because the arrangements for children's and young people's services are different, and children's and child and adolescent mental health services sit with the board, for example. So that's why we think it's going to be absolutely essential going forward that we have good, strong engagement from all our key partners, because we can only deliver this through consensus and engagement, and that's what we need to move on to. So I'll stop talking now, I think, and just if anybody's got any questions like that.
Thanks, Jen. I think it's a very good plan. as you know, I've had other opportunities to see this and have asked questions. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to repeat them all here again. But just to say, I think it's a good plan based on a good process and also fits well with the national strategy, which I think is important in terms of local delivery matching with national strategic priorities. And I say that someone who is a member of the National Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy Leadership Board. So I would commend the plan to the IJB. Are there any questions or comments from members? Councillor Colley?
Just a comment. Yeah, I've also had the chance to see this before, but I think just in general to support the approach around that a knowledge strategy. I think that particularly for young people with who are experiencing mental health challenges, that the transition into adult services and that actually we should be thinking about people throughout their life course from the earliest age to the oldest age and how we support them. So I'm very supportive. Thank you. That's good.
Okay, Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, convener. Yes, very happy that this is my first time of seeing it, but happy to support the approach being taken here. But I would like to see you to say a wee bit more about the focus on children, because children and young people's mental health, there has been a growing problem, and I am not convinced that the resources are following, and I think that's a really key issue for us that needs to be addressed. And it is about early intervention and prevention. Starts with the children and young people. If it's not dealt with at that stage, there's a lifetime of problems that will arise. So I wonder if you could say a bit more. You mentioned the challenges of doing it. So I'd like you to say a bit more about that.
Yes.
And how we're going to achieve that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So full disclosure, I have to say my clinical area is old age psychiatry. So children and young people is the other end for me. And also, although I'm the Director of Mental Health and Learning Disability Services, it doesn't include children's and young people services, and therein is one of the challenges, because children's and young persons mental health services remain with NHS Forth Valley and don't sit with either partnership. So you were talking about some of the challenges. I think that is one of the challenges, because we've got adult mental health services that primarily are delegated to Clacks and Stirling, although some obviously do sit with Falkirk as well at community level. And then you have children and adolescent mental health services that sit with the board. So that is one of the challenges we have. What we do have, though, in mitigation for that is very strong working link. We have set up a Forth Valley-wide mental health collaborative forum where we have people from adult and children's services that come together to try and make sure that we're looking at that. We're also working on a range of protocols and policies. So you mentioned transitions there. I think that's a really key issue, that transition between child and adolescent services. So we're working on having clear documented transitions protocols around about some of that. We've also tried to align within the mental health and wellbeing strategy. We've made clear and explicit reference to the children's services plans that sit with partner organisations, because we think that's another key driver and a key area where, if we do this right, we should be able to join up the wide aspirations of the mental health strategic plan with the more specific actions in the children's services plans at a local area. So we think that's going to be a key driver as well. We also had discussions with education in the development of the plan, because we're aware that a lot of young people, they don't need secondary care mental health services. That's not the right place for them to go. Actually, we've got opportunities to improve mental health and wellbeing through contacts through education. So we're very keen to do that, and we've already got agreement that we will have representation from the education sector on our implementation steering groups when we set those up as well. So we're hoping that together those things will make sure that we give the place and the focus on children and young people's mental health that we need to do.
Thank you.
Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch on page 127. There's a good, well, I say a good, there's a figure there showing, how much each of these factors impact on mental health, etc. But I was just thinking there, and it was Councillor Hannah touched on the fact children and young people. I just feel personally there's maybe it's somewhere else in the report that we're missing a section, because with children and that, they're very active in social platforms. You name it. Some of them I don't even know about, but Snapchat, Twitter's probably an old-fashioned one. There's loads of them. There's no reference here because these areas are quite significant on the impact of children, particularly in the area of bullying, peer pressure, etc. One good example of what I think is a good thing that happened recently was, I don't know where it came from, but there was a law passed where pornography sites, you had to register and verify who you were. And apparently, according to the news, the number of people that are logging on these sites has dropped enormously. And I think there's, I don't know how many young people go on the sites, but I'm sure there's a few. I just wonder, I would like to see something in that chart coming in that area, because we've covered all the other areas, but we don't cover that area which, if you think about it, if you impact on children at a young age, it's going to carry through to adulthood and lead to further serious mental problems, possibly. But it'd be really good to know something. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because we know that, and social media in particular, it can be a force for good for children and young people, but it can also cause difficulties as well. And I think that's right. I think we have to, in any plan where we're trying to improve the mental health and well-being for children and young people, we have to take into account of how they communicate, what they use, and a lot of that is online and social media. So what I would be hoping is that, as we move into the implementation phase, when we're looking at children and young people, that we absolutely take into account their online lives as well as their in-personal lives. I think that's very, very important, and we will make sure that that's incorporated into the implementation. Yeah, it is. I think that's really difficult, and again, that's one of the key things we want to do. In order for this to be meaningful, we have to implement it, and to implement it, we have to be able to measure the change, and that's across the whole plan, I think. And what we're really keen is that as we develop implementation plans for each of the 3 pillars and the actions that sit underneath that, we have associated outcomes for everyone, because we don't really want to be having clear actions without an outcome. And how do we know we've done it? So I can't say right now whether we will have a specific outcome about young people's online lives, but I think it's a good point. If we are including that as a factor we're taking into consideration, we need to think about how to measure that. So I'm probably saying I can't give you a definite answer just now, but we will take that into consideration when we're looking at the implementation.
You're probably doing it already. Maybe an opportunity then to link in with particularly in high schools, with the educational authorities, and have discussions with the teachers and the children, and then just see there what's needed there. But no, that's good. That's very positive. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Gail, did you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, just to say, excuse me, that mental health and wellbeing is one of the key priorities in our integrated children's services plan. So that is a local authority and health board plan. Now, from that plan, we have a mental health and wellbeing subgroup that is represented with adult services as well, and there is good connectivity between adult services and our children's planning partnership. And actually, Paul Smith was just at our meeting yesterday sharing this information as well, so we really are working hard to join up. Just on your point around digital communications, that has been a key focus in our group for different things. One thing being how we communicate with young people about the types of support that they can access, but also what impact could social media influences have on mental health and wellbeing. There was also a test to change around improving young people's sleep pattern, and that was around reducing the use of social media online activity later in the evening, and that actually had some positive results as well. So just really to reiterate that children's mental health continues to be a really high priority for us. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Gail. Okay, can we move to, sorry, David.
Could I, from a user perspective, how do we compare in terms of prevalence and incidence with other areas of Scotland?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Variably is the answer. there's a difference between the different areas within Forth Valley. So within the full document, we've kind of tried to lay some of that out. So, for example, Clackmannanshire has higher than national average rates of poor mental health, of drug and alcohol use, where Stirling has lower. And then Falkirk sometimes falls in the middle for some of these areas. And we've got a lot of detail in that because there's quite marked differences between Falkirk and Stirling and Clacks. The data is not fantastic. It tends to be quite broad. So it tends to be quite broad categories like rates of suicide or substance use issues or use of psychiatric medication, rather than breaking down into really specific issues, which I think is one of the challenges we've got, because if we want to deliver good, meaningful community level services, it can't just be at the level of, are you on an antidepressant, for example? That's not really very meaningful for somebody. It's got to be more about specific issues. So I think there's probably more discussions for us to be having with the community planning partnerships in particular, actually, around about the very local data that we've got. But we certainly do have, in the strategic needs assessment, we've got a breakdown of some of the different presenting problems for the different areas. So I'd be happy to share that to give you the detail, because I can't remember all the exact detail off the top of my head, but we do have it. So I'd be happy to share that if that would be useful.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I mean, in very simplistic terms, there is a very clear link with deprivation. So, Clackmannanshire tends to have the highest levels of deprivation within Forth Valley, although there are other pockets there as well. But there is a clear relationship between deprivation and mental health. Okay, if there are no other questions, then we'll move to the recommendations, which are to approve the plan and to authorise directions to implement, basically. Are we happy to approve that?
Agreed.
Okay, thanks very much, Jen. Okay, we're getting there, folks. We're not too far from the end of the agenda. Item 11 then is the Integration Joint Board Work Plan. Marie.
Thank you, Chair. Although there's no specific requirement in the standing orders to bring forward a work plan of business, it's good practice to do so. So that's why we're bringing this report today. And Appendix 1 sets out the general work plan over the next year up to June 2026. And this is not an exhaustive list. The regular items are noted in the appendix. However, additional items may be added as we go through the year on an ad hoc basis as required. So I'm not proposing to get into any detail about what's on that appendix, but people have had the paper, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at it, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Yep. So this item is to know. It certainly gives us a good idea of the key issues that are coming and when they're coming. As you say, there will be other one-off and other items that come when they are ready to come. So we have to note this. Sorry, Councillor Hannah.
Just one minor question. Paragraph 1.1 makes reference to the terms of reference for the committee. Now, I'm aware that there's terms of reference for the PAC committee, but I'm not aware of terms of reference for the IJB. And if I'm on the IJB, I want to know what the terms of reference are.
I think that's just been a typo in the report, so it should refer to the standing orders of the IJB. I think we did a similar report to the PAC committee, and that's probably where it's come from. So apologies for that. Well spotted.
Phew! There isn't something out there that I didn't know about.
You haven't missed something. I mean, we could write some terms of reference, I suppose, but no. Okay, are we happy to note that report?
Agreed.
And move on to item 12 then, which is the assurance report from the Performance Audit Assurance Committee. Lee?
Yeah, thanks. So this is now the regular assurance report that's coming from the business of the Performance Audit and Assurance Committee for IJB review. So in the appendix, you'll note that the committee agreed at the last meeting that it was assured that the information provided at the meeting was full and detailed, and there are a number of items there that the committee wanted to highlight to the IJB, including, and I'll just run through them very quickly. In relation to the internal audit plan for 25-26, the focus on budget monitoring and partnership funds processes. Also in relation to the National Audit Report and Inspections Overview, a thanks to staff in Ward 4 in Bellsdyke Hospital for the significant work undertaken in respect to the Mental Welfare Commission inspection reports. In relation to Adult Weight Management Service report, the improvements made within the service which have impacted waiting times and outcomes for people. There was a really good presentation around that at the committee. In relation to the annual internal audit plan for 24-25, the assurances and ongoing improvements set out in the governance statement, and in relation to the PAC work plan to include this within 5th of December IGB papers. Thanks. I'm happy to take any questions on that one as well. Thank you. I don't know whether Councillor Hannah, you maybe want to add any comments. Sorry.
Obviously, I'm well aware of what we discussed at the PAC committee, but what I would want to just draw attention to is the Adult Weight Management Service report, because that was, if anybody's short of reading material, I can recommend it. It was quite an eye-opener to see what could be achieved by a focused look at how things are done. So if you do get the time to look at that report, I would recommend it. But I also think that there are lessons for us to learn throughout the Health and Social Care Partnership about if that approach could have such a significant effect in terms of waiting times for people, then where else could we use that approach? So I think that's just worth highlighting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a very useful report. It both gives us assurance that the committee is carrying out its remit according to its terms of reference, which do exist, and allows those important items to be brought to this meeting. So I think it's a really good report, and I'm glad that we started doing this. Councillor Collins.
I was just a follow-up question. I was actually going to ask about the report, and that may well be a link in the virtual one. But about being able to share that, so I thought it would be interesting, certainly given the information that you've provided about how useful it is in terms of service improvement.
Great. So we'll get that report shared around members of the IGB.
Just to note as well, there's actually a video that's online, so we'll send you the link to the video. So if you want to do something other than read a report, you can watch the video.
Brilliant. Roger.
Yeah, just while people being pedantic, sorry about this. The second point says it's Belsteig Hospital. It's actually Hope House ward in Belsteig Hospital. I think that's quite important because there's one particular ward, and then working because I work with that ward, I think it's really seeing what the staff there have to, the standards they have to have. I think it's quite important to highlight that the excellent work that Hope House ward and staff there are doing.
Okay, no, I would call that being specific rather than being pedantic, so thank you. Okay, are we happy to note that report? Thank you. And item 13, communications and engagement update. Paul.
Yes, hopefully last but not means least, you'll know that I'm here to present the quarterly update, which is the ongoing monitoring of the implementation of partnerships, communication and engagement strategy and the associated joint action plan. So the content of this update covers the period April to June 2025. During this period, we received at least 9 pieces of media coverage, totaling a reach or opportunities to see of over 140,000. Coverage was received in the Falkirk Herald, Central FM and Daily Record, and largely focused on the work of the Shifting the Balance of Care work stream to support timely discharge of people throughout June, and measures underway across Forth Valley to reduce pharmacy waste. The partnership held one consultation during this reporting period, which was the consultation on developing the self-directed support policy. I think the report notes 21 responses to the online survey were received, but just to note that was also combined with face-to-face feedback gathered through engagement with the Carers Centre and the STS Short Life Working Group. In addition, in elsewhere engagement world, we've continued to work with the Carers Voice Group and the Dementia Strategy Group to continue to build on work integrating lived experience voices into the development of our services. Lived experience representatives continue to play an active role in shaping decision making across the partnership, which is why, to recognise this, we hosted Carers Representative Day on 15th of May to bring together carers, celebrate good practice and gather feedback about the Carer Rep programme. So as you also know, our new IGB service rep David joined in June, and we've also had a new service user rep join the Digital Health and Care Programme Board as well. So the quarterly update also includes an annual progress update on the Joint Communication Engagement Plan, which delivers the associated strategies published in June last year. So the update outlines that of the 38 actions within that plan, 31 are delivered or on track to be delivered as expected. 6 are ready to progress, and 1 is awaiting progress with a new timescale required due to staff capacity. And I think that's the one about a training programme for staff and on participant engagement. And then just lastly, the usual note that a full list of media coverage received, events held and consultations open during this period is provided at the end of the report, and then just to return us to the recommendations which are considered and comment. Very much.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I do feel a bit bad that this is always at the end of a very long agenda, because it's always such a good report that outlines such excellent work. So thank you for everything you do and the teams behind you. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the report. It's very useful. But I think the reporting on the budget decisions obviously has kind of fundamental impact, and I think it has highlighted very much the importance of improving our consultation and engagement and communications. And I know that you're on top of all of that, Paul, but I think it just needs to be stressed that some of the reporting has been less than accurate, not through any fault of yours. I'm well aware of that, but we have to be quick to bring forward accurate information, and we have to improve consultation and communications.
I would probably thank you for that feedback and that note, and there's some very valid points raised in the sort of things about the budget and the ways that we can improve, and I think we know that, and we certainly cast a very wide net last year, and it's sort of that feedback around getting those more targeted ones that we know that we're to work on next time. So.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just I know I mentioned it earlier, but it was just to talk about that lessons learned approach that we're taking. I know at the last IJB development session, we talked through a number of questions around whether the information had been appropriate and any improvements that we might make. We're also issuing questionnaires to all elected members as well, and also to some staff and to the extended senior management team as well. So we're taking that lessons learned approach around that, and we'll incorporate that into anything going forward. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Yep, thank you, Chair. It's good to see, well, I feel there's more information coming from you, which is good. You know, there's a significant increase in that, and it's very positive. I just have one question, and pardon me for raising it, but maybe I'm missing out on something. Central FM, 40,000 estimated circulation. Now, I never use Central FM, and I honestly don't know anybody that does. You know, and maybe I should retune my car radio to Central FM. Is that an accurate figure? Because it seems so out of line. You've got almost 2.5 times the Daily Record audience from Central FM. No disrespect to Central FM, by the way, it is a good radio station. I must say that for public consumption.
No, very sensible caveat there. But yes, those figures are provided by Central FM themselves in terms of advertising reach that's possible, and they will be an average of over the month rather than daily listeners. So I think that's where it's getting to 40,000. Yeah.
Okay, I almost feel we should say other radio stations are available, just so that we are not endorsing one over others. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, thanks again, Paul. Really is excellent work. All right, that brings us to the end of the agenda, people. As always, it's been a long meeting, but I think we've got through a lot today, and it has been really worthwhile. So thank you all for your patience and prudence in getting to the end of it, and thank you to all of the officers who've put in so much hard work to get us here behind the scenes. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you at the end of October.